This is Meisterschaft. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Man That Corrupted Hadleyburg and Other Stories by Mark Twain. Segment 32, Meisterschaft, in 3 acts. Note 1. Explanatory. I regard the idea of this play as a valuable invention. I call it the Patent Universally Applicable Automatically Adjustable Language Drama. This indicates that it is adjustable to any tongue, and performable in any tongue. The English portions of the play are to remain just as they are, permanently, but you change the foreign portions to any language you please, at will. Do you see? You at once have the same old play in a new tongue, and you can keep changing it from language to language until your private theatrical pupils have become glib and at home in the speech of all nations. Zum Beispiel, suppose we wish to adjust the play to the French tongue. First we give Mrs. Blumenthal and Gretchen French names. Next we knock the German Meisterschaft sentences out of the first scene and replace them with sentences from the French Meisterschaft. Like this, for instance. Je voudrais faire des emplettes ce matin. Voulez-vous avoir l'obligeance de venir avec moi chez les tailleurs français? And so on. Wherever you find German, replace it with French, leaving the English parts undisturbed. When you come to the long conversation in the second act, turn to any pamphlet of your French Meisterschaft, and shovel in as much French talk on any subject as will fill up the gaps left by the expunged German. Example, page 423, French Meisterschaft. On dirait qu'il va faire chaud. J'ai extrêmement chaud. Ah, qu'il fait chaud. Il fait une chaleur étouffante. L'air est brûlant. Je meurs de chaleur. Il est presque impossible de supporter la chaleur. Cela vous fait transpirer. Mettons-nous à l'ombre. Il fait du vent. Il fait un vent froid. Il fait un très agréable pour se promener aujourd'hui, and so on all the way through, and it is very easy to adjust the play to any desired language. Anybody can do it. End of Note 1. Dramatis Personae. Mr. Stevenson, George Franklin, William Jackson, Gretchen Kellnerin, Margaret Stevenson, Annie Stevenson, Mrs. Blumenthal, the Werthen. Act 1, Scene 1. Scene of the play, the parlor of a small private dwelling in a village. Margaret, discovered crocheting, has a pamphlet. Margaret, solus. Dear, dear, it's dreary enough to have to study this impossible German tongue, to be exiled from home and all human society except a body's sister in order to do it, is just simply
abscheulich.
Here's only 3 weeks of the 3 months gone, and it seems like 3 years. I don't believe I can live through it, and I'm sure Annie can't. Refers to her book and rattles through several times like one memorizing.
Entschuldigen Sie, mein Herr, können Sie mir vielleicht sagen, um wie viel Uhr der erste Zug nach Dresden abgeht?
Makes mistakes and corrects them. I just hate Meisterschaft. We may see people, we can have society, yes, on condition that the conversation shall be in German, and in German only, every single word of it. Very kind, oh, very, when neither Annie nor I can put 2 words together, except as they are put together for us in Meisterschaft or that idiotic Ollendorf. Refers to book and memorizes.
Mein Bruder hat Ihren Herrn Vater nicht gesehen, als gestern in dem Laden des deutschen Kaufmannes war.
Yes, we can have society, provided we talk German. What would conversation be like? If you should stick to Meisterschaft, it would change the subject every 2 minutes, and if you stuck to Ollendorf, it would be all about your sister's mother's good stocking of thread, or your grandfather's aunt's good hammer of the carpenter, and who's got it, and there an end. You couldn't keep up your interest in such topics. Memorizing.
Wenn irgend möglich, möchte ich noch heute Vormittag Geschäftsfreunde zu treffen.
My mind is made up to one thing. I will be in exile, in spirit and in truth. I will see no one during these 3 months. Father is very ingenious, oh, very, thinks he is anyway, thinks he has invented a way to force us to learn to speak German. He is a dear good soul and all that, but invention isn't his fach. He will see. with eloquent energy. Why, nothing in the world shall—
Bitte, können Sie mir vielleicht sagen, ob Herr Schmidt mit diesem Zuge angekommen ist?
Oh, dear, dear George, 3 weeks. It seems a whole century since I saw him. I wonder if he suspects that I care for him, just a wee bit? I believe he does, and I believe Will suspects that Annie cares for him a little, that I do, and I know perfectly well that they care for us. They agree with all our opinions, no matter what they are, and if they have a prejudice, they change it as soon as they see how foolish it is. Dear George, at first he just couldn't abide cats, but now, why, now he's just all for cats. He fairly welters in cats. I never saw such a reform. And it's just so with all his principles. He hasn't got one that he had before. Ah, if all men were like him, this world would— Memorizing.
Im Gegenteil, mein Herr. Dieser Stoff ist sehr billig. Bitte, sehen Sie sich nur die Qualität an.
Yes, and what did they go to studying German for if it wasn't an inspiration of the highest and purest sympathy? Any other explanation is nonsense. Why, they'd as soon have thought of studying American history. Turns her back, buries herself in her pamphlet, first memorizing aloud until Annie enters, then to herself, rocking to and fro, and rapidly moving her lips without uttering a sound. Enter Annie, absorbed in her pamphlet, does not at first see Margaret. Annie, memorizing.
Ließ mich gestern früh rufen und sagte mir, dass einen sehr unangenehmen Brief von Ihrem Lehrer erhalten hatte.
Repeats twice aloud, then to herself, briskly moving her lips. Margaret, still not seeing her sister.
Wie geht es Ihrem Herrn Schwiegervater? Es freut mich sehr, dass Ihre Frau Mutter wieder wohl ist.
Repeats, then mouths in silence. Annie repeats her sentence a couple of times aloud, then looks up, working her lips, and discovers Margaret. "Oh, you here?" running to her. "Oh, lovey-dovey, dovey-lovey, I've got the greatest news. Guess, guess, guess. You'll never guess in 100,000,000,000 years and more." Margaret. "Oh, tell me, dearie. Don't keep me in agony." Annie. "Well, I will. What do you think? They're here." Margaret. "What? Who? When? Which? Speak." Annie. "Will and George." Margaret. "Annie Alexandra Victoria Stevenson, what do you mean?" Annie. "As sure as guns." Margaret, spasmodically embracing and kissing her. "Shh! Don't use such language. Oh, darling, say it again." Annie. "As sure as guns." Margaret. "I don't mean that. Tell me again that—" Annie, springing up and waltzing about the room. "They're here, in this very village, to learn German for 3 months."
Es sollte mich sehr freuen, wenn Sie—
Margaret, joining in the dance. "Oh, it's just too lovely for anything." Unconsciously memorizing.
Es wäre mir lieb, wenn Sie morgen mit mir in die Kirche gehen könnten. Aber ich kann selbst nicht gehen, weil ich sonntags gewöhnlich krank bin. Juche.
Annie, finishing some unconscious memorizing.
Morgen Mittag bei mir speisen könnten. Juche.
"Sit down, and I'll tell you all I've heard." They sit. "They're here, and under that same odious law that fetters us, our tongues, I mean. The metaphor's faulty, but no matter. They can go out and see people only on condition that they hear and speak German, and German only." Margaret. "Isn't that too lovely?" Annie. "And they're coming to see us." Margaret. "Darling," kissing her. "But are you sure?" Annie. "Sure as guns, Gatling guns." Margaret. "Shh! Don't, child. It's—
Schrecklich.
Darling, you aren't mistaken?" "As sure as batteries." They jump up and dance a moment. Then Margaret, with distress. "But, Annie, dear, we can't talk German, and neither can they." Annie, sorrowfully. "I didn't think of that." Margaret. "How cruel it is! What can we do?" Annie, after a reflective pause, resolutely. "Margaret, we've got to." Margaret. "Got to what?" Annie. "Speak German." Margaret. "Why, how, child?" Annie, contemplating her pamphlet with earnestness. "I can tell you one thing. Just give me the blessed privilege. Just hinsetzen. Will Jackson here in front of me, and I'll talk German to him as long